Ben Elton talks about the serious business of making people laugh, now on BBC Two, in conversation with fellow master of comedy, Bob Monkhouse.
I have never known a time when people have been more interested in comedy than they are today. Up until about 7 or 8 years ago, people only ever asked me the same 4 questions, and that was usually out of a need to make polite conversation. They'd say, how do you think up jokes? Who makes you laugh? Are you nervous before you go on? And, are you funny at home? Are you all right at home? And that was all. Their interest in the business of comedy stopped there. But that's changed. The public curiosity about the processes of comedy and its exponents has grown with its appetite for comic entertainment. Comedy clubs, few and experimental 10 years ago, now widespread and thriving, and with them has grown the desire to know more about the comedians. How do they do it? Why do they do it? The questions asked today are often penetrating ones about style and delivery, spontaneity, instinct, invention, commitment, technique, timing, and the answers are as varied and unique as the great comedians themselves. So I'm going to put such questions to a man whose name has scrolled up on the writing credits of The Young Ones and Blackadder, who's had 2 successful plays on the West End stage, whose novels sell faster than he can write them, and who single-handedly packed theatres on sold-out national tours. This man's been called, and I quote, our most agile, articulate, adept, thought-provoking and deep-thinking writer-performer. Here he is on the screen.
There's been a lot of things going down this week. I mean, I was talking about language last week, about the way, like, merge was a sale. You know, merge was a sale. Language gets pushed back. For this government that says it's interested in education, they're very lazy with their words. We've got a new word at the moment. It's called reform. That's the word. Reform is a new word. We're not smashing the trade unions, we're reforming them. So it's going to be a lovely new defence in court, isn't it? Hey, honest, Your Honour, I didn't mug him, I just reformed him. I reformed him in the face, I reformed him in the guts, and then I reformed him in the ghoulies. Very nice indeed. There was a time when I not only didn't sleep in the nude, I slept in everything I had. It was when I was a student. And I was cold. And I wore everything I had. Not just clothes, no, everything. Books, essays, bits of carpet, everything. In my first year, I lived in this house full of bedsits. Everyone wore everything they owned. It was like a community of Michelin people. Everyone waddling around the house, getting stuck in doorways. I was in that house for 9 months. I never knew the sex of anyone else who lived there.
Here's Ben Elton. Ben, the name of this show is Funny for Money, which has a sort of vulgar euphony. It's meant to sum up what we are, but how applicable is it in your case?
I don't think that were I not fortunate enough to be making a living in entertainment, I think I would still be in it in some way or other. I was in amateur drama all through my teens. I loved to perform and I was trying to write all the time, and I like to think that if I was having to make a living elsewhere, I would be writing and trying to be funny, whatever. But yeah, I would always want to be involved in entertainment, whether I was being paid or not, but I have to say it's a lot nicer when you get paid.
Yeah. Audiences early on, you weren't paid much to entertain your early audiences. Like 10 quid here, 30 quid there.
Yeah, the original Comedy Store was £15 actually, £15 for the gig. But it wasn't too bad, because if you did 2 or 3 gigs, there were 2 shows on a Friday and 2 shows on a Saturday. And so if you were booked for all of them, you were making 60 quid. And that was considerably more than you got signing on at the time. So it was a great, even then I felt, in fact, I don't think I've ever felt, it sounds like an awful old hackneyed cliche, but I don't think I've ever felt richer than I did at that time when I first started earning a living through being an entertainer. That's a thrill that's very difficult ever to get again. And so those early days at the comic strip and the Comedy Store in '81, when I was getting enough to live on, in the thing I'd always dreamt of. That was certainly the time when being funny for money was the most exciting and the most fulfilling. So never richer than then, Bob.
No, the hungry years. It applies to a great many professions, that, but not many professions would actually dictate the style and manner in which you carry them out. How much does those early audiences who didn't know who the hell you were, and they were difficult and they were often drunk, how much do they affect your style or bring out in you a technique for dealing with them?
Yeah, I heard a laugh. Often drunk. That's true. Often, I think, perpetually or exclusively drunk. I mean, the Comedy Store used to start at midnight on Fridays and Saturday nights. So I think, you know, and that's in the heart of Soho. You can be pretty sure that even the most dedicated comedy punter had had a couple of drinks before they arrived. And they were quite rough houses. And I can safely say they dictated my performance style entirely, in that I didn't have a performance style when I started. I'd never intended to be a comedian at all. I wanted to be, and am, a comic writer. And the reason I became a stand-up comedian was because there was no other vehicle with which I could show my wares.
Yeah, obviously you would have to use a lot of power, a lot of strength, a lot of volume to hold a crowd like that.
Yeah, I think actually in the long run, it did me quite a lot of harm artistically. It didn't do me any harm professionally. I was paid, and I got to know an awful lot of great people in the comedy world and worked with them, and it was a wonderful start. But those sort of tough late night houses with kind of, you know, drunks, tables full of lads competing with each other so you could be most sort of bored and aggressive during your act, led me to a very fast, very fearful delivery. I was very fast, I shouted and came across as aggressive. I'm a deeply non-aggressive person. I mean, I don't like aggression. I certainly don't feel it takes a lot to make me angry, and when I get angry, I certainly don't get sort of violent or even verbally violent. I'm a peacemaker. I hate scenes, like most people do. You know, I couldn't, you know, if there was pubes in my soup, I couldn't hand it back. I'd just sort of, you know, I'd hope they get trapped in my teeth. I'd suck it through. It's very strange, the persona that I sort of developed on stage to overcome the fear that I felt and the indifference that the audience felt, developed this kind of aggressive and fast and sweary thing, which took me a long time to sort of get over, actually.
How different is it now, Ben? Because those audiences you had to convince, and you had to convince yourself that you're able to perform. Now you play to huge audiences who've seen the label on the tin, as it were, and they want to eat the contents. They've bought the ticket to see Ben Elton.
Only the group is backstage. They're the only ones that want to actually eat the contents. Most people have to laugh and go. Can't we just being naughty? There are no groupers.
You've got a great big crowd there with long laughs. You've got time to think. You can enjoy the pauses. Any lapse of memory can be repaired during a long laugh. That has disadvantages too. That audience expects you to do certain things. Is that restrictive?
That's a really good question, and there's a number of things in it, and I'll try to be succinct. When I first did big theatres, I was not the label on the tin. I used to tour with Rick Mail, and so I have a fairly unique experience of having had a lot of experience of big houses, of people who want to see you and of people who don't know who you are. When I used to tour with Rick, it was because I co-wrote The Young Ones with him, and he liked my act, and I used to do the first half, and as far as he was concerned, we were kind of double bill, but as far as the audience was concerned, I was the support act. And people used to say it was very tough for me because nobody knew I was, but I used to think it was easy because Rick had all the expectation. They expected him to be utterly hilarious, as great as the finest memory of The Young Ones. Whereas with me, if I was even half good, it was a bonus. So when you play a big house of people who are looking forward to seeing a show, then I suppose being the unknown one is nice. When you play a little house, a little pub with people who probably think the show's going to be crap anyway, then that's very hard. Much better to be a celebrity, much better to have that expectation and that goodwill. Because when you play in a small theatre, which thank goodness I don't have to play these little places when who's he? Well, maybe he's funny. Well, I'll listen for 3 seconds, and if not, I'm getting up the bar. You've no chance then. You know, that's why I developed that quick, get a laugh within the first few seconds. Now I'm lucky I play these big houses and people have come to see me. It's wonderful because they are going to give you the time, they're going to give you the space, they trust you, but obviously you have an enormous expectation to fill because they hope you're going to be as good as their best memory of you.
Yes.
So it's a double-edged sword. On the whole, I'd rather be famous, but it does have its problems. But but finally, the thing you said about the space it gives you, the audience, the trust the audience have in you if they believe you're going to be good, that has been the greatest help to me as a in the art of stand-up comedy. I don't say that, you know, you've got to be famous before you get any good, but with me, I've got a lot better playing with audiences that trust me, because to pause was a revelation for me. I honestly don't think in the first 8 years I was a stand-up comic, I don't think I paused once. I really genuinely don't think I drew breath ever. I mean, if you look at the early Saturday Lives, and blah, 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 you know, and before that it was even faster. And even now I'm terrified to pause. The fear of those distant days when the hecklers were in like that, the second you gave them a second. Hasn't happened to me in a long time, but I still got the resonance in the back of my mind, and it ruins your comedy. So, anyone's watching this who thinks like heckling per se is a good idea, then just think about whether everybody in that theatre really wants to listen to them or wants to listen to the comedian they've actually paid to see, even if they don't know who that comedian is. A witty heckle, of course, that can contribute to the night, but you and I know that a witty heckle is 1 in 1,000.
Yeah.
You very rarely hear one. Normally, it's just effing and blinding from the back. That's all it is. So, learning to pause took a lot of courage for me.
Yes. I've seen that reposed in your performance now. The 1993 tour. There are moments in that where you really have moments of quiet, where you know you're in control.
Yeah, I really don't know. It's a funny... This is why I always protest that I'm not a natural performer. I mean, quite apart from the fact that I genuinely don't think I get many laughs physically. Well, I mean, I get a few. I know how to, you know, mess around a bit. But I never feel in control. I'm always scared. I think everyone... You're always... You know you are. You trust people, you know. It's not... You don't feel manipulative. You don't think you're some kind of genius. Oh, they'll listen to me. You know you've got to be good. And I suppose that's what I'm trying to say. I feel I'm in control as long as I work as hard as I can and think as hard as I can and deliver as much as I can, then I'm in control. Yeah. But if I get lazy for a second, I will definitely lose control, because if you shortchange the audience, they'll understand in a moment.
Well, then, what do you do when you're breaking in new material, completely untried stuff? How do you prepare that? How do you rehearse it? And how do you break it in? I
prepare it, rehearse it, and break it in the lavatory. There is the scariest, as you know, as well as anyone. New material is the great, you know, is the great awful moment to write. Particularly if you write it yourself. I write all my own material. Everything I've ever said on telly, I take responsibility for, because that's why I do it. I think the material is the central thing. Like, well, I know we're going to get on to greats, but somebody like Tommy Cooper, the material was merely a vehicle for the unutterable instinctive genius of the man. That is not me. You know, what I'm about is what I say. And if it's funny, then that's good enough. To write a new routine based on some feeling one has, some idea of oneself, because a lot of my material is based on my own fears, my own delights, etc. So you're kind of exposing yourself a little bit. You're exposing... I'll give you an example of this. You write a routine that you're talking about something that's in your mind. I get scared of everything. Used to do a routine called Captain Paranoia, about checking every plug, about wondering whether the kettle's going to suddenly burst into flames just because you've left it plugged in, you know. And the door will unlock itself and beckon burglars in the moment you leave the house. And it got almost quite sort of debilitating for me. I mean, I was wasting like 20 minutes a day checking plugs, you know? And I wrote a routine about this, and I had no idea really whether people agreed with me, because a lot of my friends would say, "You're an idiot, I'll leave them on," you know? And I'd think, well, maybe it's just me, but I sort of guessed the sort of principle most comics follow is if you feel it, kind of everybody does. We're all basically the same, you know? You know, in the real basic smallness of our fears and paranoias. So I did this routine, and I did it in Glasgow Pavilion. It's a 1,500 seater, and the fear of doing it and wondering, does anybody agree with this? You know, I mean, it's if you do a routine about, you know, the first time you know the old boy doesn't come up to scratch when you think, well, am I the only person who's ever had a flop? You know, and it's like big relief when everybody goes, yeah. You think, thank goodness. So. How do you do it? You write it, you try it out on an audience, and you just pray.
Captain Paranoia hit a nerve right away, didn't it? Half that audience immediately.
Yeah, that was born fully formed, so to speak. I don't think I'd changed much of a word of that. A bit of improvisation added to it, but basically, routine as written. You could go back to the original script, and it is a script. People think you make it up as you go along, but of course you don't. You work very hard on the material, learn it, and deliver it.
I know you'll script everything at the VDU. You'll script everything you can. How long will you persist in performance with that material if the laughs are few?
It doesn't happen very often, because I really try very hard before I go on stage to make sure I got it right, because no audience is a tryout audience. Every audience has to be treated with the utmost respect, so I would never go on stage with what I consider to be genuinely experimental. I've applied the best of my comic instincts to getting it right. And sometimes it's the best run on it you'll ever have. Sometimes that first time when the fear and the adrenaline and all the ideas are sparking together. So I don't do like a few little gigs to... Sometimes I'll play a smaller theatre and mix some old material and some new material in, but I never do it thinking without the confidence that it's going to work. I never go on stage thinking, well, maybe it will, maybe it won't. If it doesn't, I'll throw it out. I always think it's going to. And is there any wood here? I think this is BBC full mark. I don't know, but so far it does. I mean, that's why I'm a writer.
There's a fine line between comedy and humour. What's on the page and funny is usually hapless stuff to perform. You can't go out there and do Alan Coren's wonderful column from the Times as a performance piece. And usually the same thing is true. Performance comedy doesn't read very well. Most scripts don't read well. Now, once you put that on the page, knowing you're going to perform it, where do you discover the pauses? Where do you find that emphasis will work for me? Where do you discover that a ridiculous piece of silly, a great loping walk, a dance on the stage will emphasise and sell the joke?
Well, all performance has to have an element of improvisation, I think, stand-up comedy. I think if you do it by rote, if you just deliver it, then you really are in trouble. In fact, once, I learned that very early on. When I first became a comic, I wrote myself a little act, and I had this stuff. It was all about joggers and things and Big Macs, which was sort of like, pretty hot gear in those days. Joggers were sort of a new satirical target in those days. This is 15 years ago. I did it, and it went well. Like, first gig, I was all right, and they booked me again, and within 3 or 4 weeks, they asked me if I'd like to think about comparing an early show. I had a big start. I was good. And a few weeks went by, and I was feeling I can do this. I was still scared, but I'd go on and I can do it. And I did my little jogging stuff and my stuff about, Big Macs, fast food. I don't know why they don't just flush it straight down the toilet. That'd speed it up, wouldn't it? Great gear it was. I was that pleased with it that one night I just went on and just did it. I just delivered it without really thinking about it. And I used to have a little sort of conversational tick where I'd just say, it's the truth, as my act went on. I'd say, anyway, I was in the park the other day, it's the truth, and I was just having a fag, right, and it's the truth. And a stupid little quirk, people say, you know what I mean? You have a little tick that runs, and somebody shouted, this is the one and only heckle I've ever had. I really appreciate it. I applaud whoever it was. Shouted out, you keep saying it's the truth, but it obviously isn't. And wow, it was like a bucket of water in the face, because it was absolutely right. It had been the truth the previous night when I'd been thinking about it and delivering it with the passion that I'd written it with. But that night I wasn't thinking about it. I was just going through the motions. That you couldn't have told the difference, like, from a distance. But there, because I wasn't just going like that. I was delivering it, but something wasn't there. Yeah. You've got to re-perform the material every single night. Even if you've done it 200 times, you've got to reinvent the comic arguments every night for that. And that's where the improvisation comes in. So to answer your question, where do you discover the little walk or the little pause or whatever? Every night something happens, and sometimes you keep it in, and sometimes it's only special for that one night. I mean, interestingly, so the best imps of all are the ones that really only work that night. Something happens in the house, something happens, and you just, you stick with it. But some improvisations are just great lines, and you keep them in. I mean, only recently, as an old routine, I did about all those shaved fannies on Baywatch, and I was one point I won't do the routine for you now. But at one point I say, no, why don't they? They're lifesavers. They've got a job to do. Haven't they got room on a team for one big old Bertha who doesn't give a toss? Haircut out the nose, out of her arse, and all that. And I improvised on, like, only a few weeks ago. A new old routine. I'd had it in the act for a year. I improvised, she's got hair coming out here, and oh, someone's drowning, quick, hang on to these, And it was it just came out of the blue. Yeah, I mean, and you know that, when an improvisation appears, I don't know what it is, God, the muse, whatever touches you. And so it's the search for that which keeps the material fresh. So that's where those moments come from. But that doesn't mean that the material, when it's performed early in its life, and the life of my material is from the day I write it till the day I do it on telly. That's the life of them, because once it's on telly, it's sort of dead. So it doesn't mean it's better at the end, because there's something else going on in the early days which doesn't work anymore. Things come, things go from acts. The funniest thing, I used to do this great thing where I scratch. Can't do it anymore. You know that feeling.
Yes.
It just departs from you. There is a muse. There definitely is a muse somewhere, and it sort of wafts in and wafts out again.
That organic growth on the hoof, the stuff that you invent in situ, I think that's the test of a stand-up comedian, and that's why I find your assertion that you're not a natural stand-up comedian is absurd. How tiring do you find performing? I mean, it's a lot of physical work goes into your
Yes, I mean, it's not very tiring, really. I mean, people are often, I think artists are much indulged. One is often invited to to say, oh, you know, it must be apparently like the adrenaline and the fear, it's like, you know, it's like going through World War II. Apparently that's what a show's like. You know, you'll hear actors say, like, playing a lead Shakespearean role's like being in a car crash. It's that, apart from breaking your limbs and 8 months in hospital, apart from that, it's just the same. I think we are much indulged. It's a, you know, if you can do it, it's hard work, and if you've got quite a physical way of performing, like I have these days, you know, that I used to stand behind a mic and just do that for years and years, and then one day I had this marvellous discovery. Hey, I can move. It was an amazing moment. I mean, literally, I've been doing it for 5 years, and I had never picked a microphone up in 5 years, maybe 1,000 gigs. I don't know how many gigs. And then one day, woof, I was off. It was because somebody told me I looked nice when I moved.
Yes, that'll do it. One person telling you one thing will free you.
Yeah, a bit of flattery, you see. Yeah, it does. I mean, absolutely. Just the penny drops and you think, I can do that.
You're a lager man. You like a drink. Do you drink before a drink?
Never. No, I feel very strongly about that because I'm fearful that if I had a couple of drinks before a gig and I did a good gig, I'd think that was why I had a good gig. And I've sort of always... I have seen a few casualties, you know, about the place. No names, no pack drill, etc. Not total. I've never known anyone a real... but, you know, people where you think, well, you better watch it, you know, you're being easy, you're having a drink, you know, it doesn't work. And other stuff, you know, and I've never been interested in that. For me, it's an intellectual experience doing a stand-up act. Maybe a few people out there think, what to do, what, excuse me. It rhymes with tanker, but it is. I mean, I'm constructing arguments, comic ideas, and you really need to be absolutely spot on the ball because it is a mental thing. I'm trying to make my point, so to speak. So it is tiring. I mean, you come off sweaty, but in terms of the tension, in terms of the physical activity, I always use the same example. I mean, I would imagine that a morning on a checkout at Tesco's, some poor kid, you know, not being paid very well, dealing every few seconds with a customer, you know, something's not priced, somebody wants to pay by Barclaycard, there's a queue of people who all hate the hell out of you because it's your fault that they're standing there. You imagine the tension that you must go through with something like that, and I think we've, on stage, we've got, not an easy job, but, you know, you've got to get it into perspective.
Let me move on to your selection of targets, because comedy is mainly a question of targets, yours in particular. But you choose targets that you decide the audience is going to agree with you on, obviously, otherwise you won't get your laughs. I wonder by what process you select those targets.
This is the first time the interview's going to, you know, this is where it gets prickly, this is where I'm going to use it, because I utterly refute your suggestion. I choose targets on which I think the audience is going to agree with me. That would be a nonsense for a comedy, I think, for any decent comedy, because if you try and please all the people, you will please no one. The only thing I believe a comic writer can do in order to have a halfway decent chance of communicating with the audience is to please themselves, to think what they think, to consider their own frustrations, their own personal inadequacies, the things that they like, the things that they hate, work on that and hope that it communicates with an audience. If I have been frustrated by that dickhead in the Yellow Pages ad mowing the lawn and, you know, nearly having a heart attack, but they get him a better lawnmower, aren't they nice to him, or whatever, then maybe everybody else thinks it's stupid, or a lot of people think it's stupid. But if I think, now, what are people going to like? You know, I bet they hate that, I'll have a go at that. I'll get nowhere, and you know that's the case. So I please myself. And I certainly didn't move from having a go at Thatch because, hey, we're all right on in '86 to having a go at Flymo because we're all consumer-orientated in '89. Rubbish, I was having a go at Thatch. But I have a go at what I consider to be funny, amusing, hypocritical, interesting. I think Thatch was all those things. And so, you know, for a while she was in the act. People say you don't do as much about John Major as you used to do about that. Well, if I was doing a live telly show every week, I'd be having a go at what the government was up to. Of course I would, whether it was Labour or Conservative or whatever. But I'm not. And if I invite people to come to a theatre to see, you know, a 3-hour show, 2-hour show, whatever, the last thing I want is a load of weak gags about, you know, what a bunch of pricks the cabinet. Everyone's done jokes about family values. There's not much more what can be said. These people are self-satirising. So that's why I don't really do very much about them. But, you know, if Saturday Live was back, I suppose I'd be back doing, you know, grey John Major gags, I suppose.
What about the umbrellas you use? Will you group gags under a single heading? Which comes first, the heading or the gags? Which one comes first, the Ministry of Crap Design or the teapot,
I mean, you know, it is, for years, because I tour a lot, and as you tour a lot, you know, motorway service station, you get these metal teapots, you can't pick them up till the tea's gone cold because the metal conducts and you burn your hand. And for years, I've got to write something about this, and it took a long time for me to get the right context and the right routine. So I had the idea in the back of my head, and I have always felt that those napkins that you pluck out of the napkin pluckers are non-absorbent, because if you blow your nose on one, you end up with snot all over your chin. And so a lot of various ideas were, and I kind of jotted them. I don't carry a notebook round, because that way you become a kind of journalist on your own life, and you don't live your life, you live it as an observer of it, and that way leads to madness. But if something's still with me at the end of the day, I might jot it down. And, you know, I had a few ideas, and I needed a kind of... So, yes, that was an intellectual exercise, to invent a spurious kind of a fake bag to put all these different ideas in. So I was going to write stuff about those toilet paper dispensers that you have to kind of tease out of the dispenser because you can't quite find the end, and that went into the same bag. And, you know, before you knew it, you've got a kind of what looks like it's some great view on life, but actually it's just a load of old gags that have been crowbarred in under an umbrella. That's one way of doing it. Another way is when you see something you think that must be funny, like, you know, I mean, it's old stuff now, but the way the Tories got themselves into such a mess over family values. You know, they announce a big family values thing, and suddenly they're all shagging each other's secretaries, and, you know, so then that's a different way of writing a routine. You see some big thing which you know is funny, and you have to find a way of demonstrating that.
Yeah. A device that you have adopted, I was going to say originated, but I do remember examples of performers who also used the device. That is to spike critical guns by building in your own criticism of an ongoing performance, which could be used to disarm an audience or to charm them or even involve them, make them think something is going on. Yeah. You early on would say, Ben's got a bit
of politics.
A little bit of politics there, but then you use the chin people in The First Man from Auntie, the upside-down face with the makeup on the chin, to comment on you and what you're doing. He's gone a bit far there, I don't agree with him there, he's wrong. During your stage performance, you will actually say, we've gone too far. Even if the audience hasn't given you that reaction, you'll kid them.
You mean I cheat?
You cheat.
Yes,
because
like all comedians.
Because you've got a great effect out of it. You can pull the naughty boy face, which is the only sign of real vulnerability that you usually employ shamelessly.
Apart from 3 hours in the lavatory before the gig, but they don't know about that.
You can't film that, can you? And telling the guy off stage to keep the engine running and to make a note of what has just gone too far. Now, that's a terrific device, and you use it in the last series of Man from Auntie by having the what mugs we are guy comment on. But you'll still spike my... I can't say to you, well, I think you went a bit far with that, Ben, because you've already done it. Is that a deliberate attempt to stop people coming up to you and saying, we thought there were too many penis jokes?
No, I mean, they'll always say that, because there are too many penis jokes, frankly. It's something I have to put my hand up to. No. Anyway, wherever we were, if you say I did it to spike critical guns, then I have singly failed, because I have not been critically very well received, certainly in terms of my stand-up act. This is what I'm talking about in terms of the press. In terms of the actual audience, of course, you know, they tend to enjoy it, or else it wouldn't, you know, I wouldn't be able to get through the evening. I genuinely am not as manipulative as you might presume. You are absolutely right. I have, right from the beginning, I'm going, a little bit of politics, they're not sure about that one. That's because I'm thinking, blimey, they're not sure about that one. And I'm sort of saying it because I think it, but it's not manipulative. I never think I can control an audience. I can second guess them, spike their guns, make them think something they don't want to think. I am relying entirely on my own feelings about my routine, telling them what I think, and that is a better way of doing it, because above all, thine own self be true, honesty is the best policy, and various other cliches. These are what comedians should know, I feel.
You said in one of the interviews that you were you're very patient with the press, considering the fact you don't like them very much, but you said to one particular journalist who wrote very well of you, and she quoted you as saying, as a stand-up, I'll never be one of the all-time greats. This is you speaking about yourself.
No, that's a misquote, because I would never even, genuinely, I would never have had the arrogance to suggest that anybody was going to think I was ever going to be one of the all-time. I would never have said that. I might have said, as a stand-up, I'll never be a great stand-up, but I mean, the all-time greats, I mean, by all-time, well, what's your all-time greats? I mean, you know, I wouldn't even aspire to even be even in the same room as my all-time greats.
Who are the all-time greats for you?
Who? Well, speaking in terms of my experience, I always think it's quite funny the way we all talk so knowledgeable. Well, of course, there's Max Miller, there's obviously Rob Wilton, Dan Leno, you know, but of course none of us have any idea really what even Max, you perhaps remember Max, but I mean, well, you do actually, I mean, but for me to talk within my experience, I suppose, talking in light entertainment rather than, because there's comedy acting and there's sort of light entertainment, so if we leave you know, Arthur Lowe, John LeMessurier, the carry-on actors, the, you know, Cleese. If we talk about variety, which is because we're talking about stand-up comedy, I suppose in my experience, Tommy Cooper, the two Rons, Brucey on his day, great entertainer. My all-time favourite act is Morecambe and Wise.
Yes, I find that fascinating. I mean, I'd love to ask you what you find especially magic about Morecambe and Wise, but first of all, a little reminder of the magic that they did exercise. What especially, I think they're wonderful, but what especially speaks to you?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, nothing, because it's when you love comedy, when you enjoy, I don't mean me loving comedy as a comedian, when anybody sees what they like, they don't need to know why. It just happens with Tommy Cooper or Morecambe and Wise. If you then start to analyse it, as I suppose, you know, I did a degree in drama, and I think we should have done Eric and Ernie, because I think Braben's scripts for these two fellas in bed together, needling each other, talking about the sadness of their emptiness. There's a moment where Ernie says he's going to leave and get married, and Eric says, you're not going to put me in a home, are you? You know, and I mean, it's so strange and surreal. We all know these were very famous and wealthy comedians, and yet you believed utterly in their relationship. The honesty of that, it's just, you know, you can't really, in the long run, you can't say why some people are brilliant comedians, and you could never understand why Eric and Ernie were so perfect.
Do you sense or do you believe that all great comedy has behind it this sort of sadness, this vulnerability?
Well, I think that's the wrong way of putting it. I think the reason that sort of idea comes about is because people are always surprised to see sadness and pathos in comedy, from Keaton and Chaplin through to Eric and Ernie and the fabulous, take something like Rigsby in Rising Damp, a very sad character. People are rather surprised, say, oh, it's so funny, isn't it? Yeah, it's sad, isn't that funny? That's funny peculiar in that case. It isn't strange, it isn't funny peculiar, it's essential. For really good comedy shouldn't be something that we nail onto life. Comedy should be about life. So the sadness isn't behind the comedy, the sadness is part of it. The glory of something like Dad's Army, and something like there is only one Dad's Army, but there's some great sitcoms, some wonderful work. Dad's Army is not the only one. And they deal in the reality of being human, I think, and not to put too fine a point on it. And that's not neither being sad or happy or enthusiastic or not enthusiastic. It's everything.
You did that yourself, didn't you? The very clear relationships between Filthy Rich and Catflap, between the characters in Happy Families, possibly at your most successful, initially with Young Ones, but Blackadder, working with Richard Curtis. The relationship between the characters was everything. Are you more Baldrick than you are Blackadder?
I think I'm both. You know, Baldrick's an eternal optimist, and Blackadder's a terrible cynic. Actually, in that respect, I'm more Baldrick. I'm much more optimistic. I abhor cynicism. I used to, at university, the people that were the coolest were the cynics, and that used to piss me off something rotten. The people who weren't interested in anything, thought everything was crap. You know, why are you interested? You know, don't vote. Don't get, you know, like you. I'd be going, let's put on a play, everyone. Let's do. Oh man, you know, like you're so naff, you know. And you know, that was more attractive, I suppose. You know, certainly they got more of the other, but they wouldn't have had to have money, frankly, to get more.
You've said that a comedian who performs his own work is more secure than those who don't. Is that more subjective than objective? Because the heroes of whom you've spoken were working other people's material.
Yes. It is subjective, and it was a wild punt that's been reproduced in many a cut. I think that I really do try not to make statements as bold as that. I do think, as a theory, Hancock hangs over everybody. I mean, oh dear. Tony Hancock hangs over everybody. You know, the terrible and terrifying story of one of the greatest comic performers of the century dying so sadly. And it's just a guess that perhaps if you know that despite your genius being 100% you and it needs the key of somebody else, that must be quite a nervous situation. Whereas if you're like me, who just, you know, do your own knob gags, and whether they're bad or good, at least you've only yourself to blame. You know what I mean? That's kind of almost relaxing. If it's crap, it's my fault. Whereas if you're always thinking, as Hancock clearly was when he left Galton and Simpson, you know, maybe it's their fault. I can do it alone, or whatever. But having said that, I mean, I work with a lot with Rowan Atkinson, for instance. I mean, a very together. I mean, a joy to work with. He's never he's prepared to wait. He writes some of his own stuff as well. But if he wants a script, he will wait for something to do. He's not desperate to perform. So it's not a truism. It's not true that all people who don't write their own gear are going to be sad. But I think it must be quite tense.
If you had to sum up a few rules that govern writing and performing comedy, what would you say are paramount things to observe for a young, ambitious comedian or comedy writer who's watching you now?
Well, I would say there are very few rules. No rules can govern instinct. All writing is a process of improvisation. So you can't make a rule of what you're going to write, but you can facilitate that improvisation. You can make it flow. And it is I believe from my work as myself and knowing other writers, you know, some very well indeed, Richard Curtis, who I've worked with very much on The Blackadder, you have to work hard. It sounds naff, but you cannot wait for inspiration to strike. Inspiration only comes when your mind is beginning to roll, and somehow you've got to kind of kick-start it. Like on stage, at first, you can't walk on stage and instantly think of a great new joke, but if the show's rolling and the audience are with you and your material's going great, then somehow your brain's clicking into gear and things are beginning to happen. The same goes for sitting at a word processor or with a pen or whatever. It is so easy to give up in half an hour or an hour because nothing's going to happen. The chances of sitting down and hitting a roll instantly are virtually zero. Maybe the very first time you do it. Maybe the first time, because then you're inspired, I've got to write, you know. But after that, it's work. And I think the first and foremost rule for writing is that you cannot give up after the first hour, the first 2 hours. You've got to keep concentrating, keep thinking.
But the same thing does apply to performing. Persist.
Yes, I mean, I think I was quite lucky. I had quite an encouraging first gig, but I bet if I went back, I died. But the fact that I got through it at all was encouraging enough for me. I think anyone wanting to be a stand-up comic there's no question they will have some awful gigs when they won't get laughs and things. And I think if you give up at that point, it's a cliche, you know, try again. But I think because good comedy is about improvisation, it's even truer to keep trying as a comic because you will not spark that role. You will not get the glint in your eye if you keep stopping and starting. You've got to push forward. It's very difficult, but you can't tell someone how to do it. I wish somebody had told me how to do it, you know. I mean, I wouldn't have talked so damn fast, you know, but everyone has to discover it themselves.
Ben, I think most people would agree that you are the most astonishing comedian to have emerged on the scene in the last 10 years and will continue to be as a performer. I hope the writer goes on serving him as well as he has in the past. Ben Elton, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Bob.